Good evening, everybody. I hope you are fine. I hope you are safe. I hope you are happy. I hope that you're not breaking the lockdown, the curfew, the emergency, in which we are, mired in, if you like. We are, undergoing such terrible circumstances. We should act as one body to get out of it. So please stay safe and do not waste your time on useless things. Try to read as much as possible, because as soon as this pandemic is gone to hell, we will continue our study at the faculty. So I hope you are fine, you are safe, you are enjoying, the lockdown. I'm sure you're not enjoying the lockdown, but yeah, you have nothing to do with it. I mean, you can't do anything about it. I mean, it's a lockdown, so you're locked down. Stay safe. This time I'm going to talk to you about the nature of literature. Last time I answered 2 or 3 questions, if you remember. What is literature? And then to say what is literature is also to say what is not literature. If you ask what is literature, you also ask implicitly what is not literature. And also I answered the question, what is literary study? This time, yes, I'm going to continue my talk around literature, but this time I'm going to kind of focus on the nature of literature. So what is the nature of literature? This is the question I'm going to answer this evening. Last time I said literature refers to creative art, to imaginative art. Yes, to answer the question, what is the nature of literature, I need to kind of seek insights from a number of critics. So one group of critics, some critics argue that literature refers to everything in print. And by the way, these critics are Eurocentric, critics. This is, by the way, a Eurocentric notion to say that literature refers to everything in print. This is very Eurocentric. It excludes orature from the map, orality. Literature told orally. If you see literature as everything in print, then you should study even the medical profession in the 14th century, or planetary motion in the early Middle Ages, everything. Or even witchcraft in Old and New England. Or even journalistic articles of today, the crazy articles, of today, published, by journals. Or any other pieces of human writing. As long as, you tend to see literature as having to do with everything in print, everything written, that is written. Edwin Greenlaw, a critic, who wrote a book called The Province of Literary History, argued that nothing related to the history of civilization is beyond our province, is beyond our study. We are not limited to belles lettres or even to printed or manuscript records in our effort to understand a period or civilization. And we must see our work in the light of its possible contribution to the history of culture. You see, Greenlaw thinks that, to understand human civilization, you should study everything in print, and everything that is in print, for Greenlaw and his, promoters, is regarded as literature. According to Greenlaw's theory, to his theory, Literary study has thus become not merely closely related to the history of civilization, but indeed identical with it, very identical with it. Such study is literary only in the sense that it is occupied with printed or written matter. If we take literature to be all that is in print, we will have to study everything that has to do with the history of civilization. Historians will be studying diplomatic, military, and economic history, and literary students will thus enter an area, a field other than literary history, as long as literature is understood in association with print. And this is very difficult for them. The study of everything connected with the history of civilization does, as a matter of fact, crowd out strictly literary studies. Thus, therefore, as a result, all distinctions fall. Extraneous criteria, remember, like those presented by the sciences of nature, are introduced into literature. Chaos begins, and by consequence, literature will be judged valuable only so far as it yields results for this or that adjacent discipline. The identification of literature with the history of civilization is a denial of the specific field and the specific methods of literary study. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Other critics argue that literature has to do with great books. Now, it's not everything in print. Now, it is associated with great books. Books which, whatever their subject, if this subject could be about physics, whatever their subject, these books are notable for literary form or expression. Here the criterion is either aesthetic work alone, or aesthetic work in combination with a general intellectual distinction. Within lyric poetry, within drama, within fiction, the greatest works are, selected on aesthetic grounds. Other books are picked for their reputation or for their intellectual eminence, together with aesthetic value of a rather narrow kind, like style, composition, general force of presentation, are the usual characteristics singled out. This is a common way of distinguishing or speaking of literature. By saying this is not literature, we express such a value judgment. We make the same kind of judgment when we speak of a book on history, when we speak of a book on philosophy or science as belonging to literature. Most literary histories do include treatment of philosophers. Yes, indeed, treatment of historians, treatment of theologians, treatment of moralists, politicians, and even some scientists. It would be, for example, difficult, yes, to imagine a literary history of, for example, 18th century England without an extended, a rich treatment of Bishop Berkeley, of David Hume, of Bishop Butler, of Edward Gibbon, of Edmund Burke, or even Adam Smith. It would be almost impossible to think of this literary history, the literary history of 18th century England. It would be almost impossible to think of it without involving the thought of these philosophers, of these thinkers, of the thought of Berkeley, the thought of Hume, Butler, the thought of Gibbon, the thought of Burke, the thought of Smith. The treatment of these authors, though usually much briefer than that of poets, it's usually much briefer, yes, than that of poets, than that of playwrights, a novelist, is rarely limited to their strictly aesthetic merits. In practice, we get perfunctory and inexpert accounts of these authors in terms of specialty. Quite rightly, Hume cannot be judged except as a philosopher, Gibbon except as a historian, Butler except as a Christian apologist, and a moralist, and Adam Smith as a moralist and economist. Yet in most literary histories, these thinkers are discussed in a fragmentary fashion without the proper context. They do not do them justice. Without a real grasp of the history of philosophy, of ethical theory, of historiography, or of economic theory, the literary historian is not automatically transformed into a proper historian of these disciplines. He becomes simply a compiler, somebody who is a self-conscious intruder. You see, when you associate literature with great books, you, as a literary historian, become an intruder if you involve, these thinkers into your literary thought, and you're not going to do them justice. So, yes, you should include these thinkers into your discussion of your literary subject, to present a rich, paper, presentation, article, whatever. But unless you have a full knowledge of the context in which these thinkers wrote, spoke, you're not going to do them justice. You are but a self-conscious intruder. The study of isolated great books, yes, may be highly commendable for pedagogical purposes. We all must approve the idea that students, and particularly beginning students, should read great or at least good books, like the ones, written by the philosophers I have just mentioned. Should read great or at least good books rather than compilations or historical curiosities. Yes. Yet within the history of imaginative literature, limitation to the great books, makes incomprehensible the continuity of literary tradition, the development of literary genres, and indeed the very nature of the literary process, besides obscuring the background of social, linguistic, ideological, and other conditioning circumstances. The term literature seems best comprehensible, best understood, if we limit it to the art of literature. That is, if we limit it to the art of imaginative literature. Great books, anything in print, could be regarded as literature, but not literature in the sense, in our sense. Literature in our sense has to do with imaginative literature. So literature in this sense becomes comprehensible, seems the best, comprehensible, and it is grasped. The terms literature and belles lettres are clumsy and misleading. Belles lettres has to do with, the writings produced on literature, critical studies. One of the objections to literature is its suggestion of limitation to written or printed literature. For me, I don't look at literature as everything in print. I don't associate literature with the letter because I'm not a Eurocentrist. I belong to a culture that is rich with oral stories. These stories, in my opinion, are forms of literary expression. So they should be included, and orality should be included. One of the objections, to literature, to the term, to the definition of the term, is its indication of limitation to written or printed literature. Why? Because any coherent conception must include, as I said, oral literature. To solve this problem, that literature is a written material, refers to written material, to everything in print, and it includes great books. We need to distinguish. This is the problem, and to solve it, we need to distinguish the particular use made of English in literature. We should go back to the particular use made of English in literature. That is to say, we need to distinguish between literary language, scientific language, and everyday language. To solve this problem, this distinction will tell us what literature is, what literature is not. Scientific language, the language which you will be asked to write your research papers next year. Scientific language, as well as a good deal of everyday language, depend on denotation, the one-to-one correspondence between words and the object or the ideas they represent. Denotation describes the literal meaning of the signifier. Yes. It has to do with the literal meaning of the signifier. The terms signified and signifier are most commonly related to semiotics, and probably you have studied these terms in one of your linguistics classes, and you might have talked about the Ferdinand de Saussure's course in general linguistics, this book, in which he explains that a sign is not only a sound image but also a concept. A sign for de Saussure is not only a sound image, it's not just a sound, it's not just an image, it is also a concept. He divides the sign into two components, the signifier or sound image, and the signified or the concept. The signifier is interpreted as the material form, something which can be seen, something which can be heard, touched, smelled, or tasted, and the signified as the mental concept. For example, apple, the fruit, apple. The sign is the object, the apple. The signifier, has to do with the physical existence of the apple, like the word apple, and unlike the image of apple in reality. And if it has a sound, then its sound is part of its signifier. Yes, and the signified has to do with the mental concept of the apple, how we see apple in our mind. That's the concept, the mental concept. Scientific language doesn't draw attention to itself. yes, doesn't draw attention to itself. It doesn't try to be beautiful or emotionally evocative. What its a job is to point not to itself but to the physical world beyond it, which it attempts to describe and explain. So it doesn't point to itself. Unlike scientific language, literary language, the language used by poets, by novelists, depends on connotation. It doesn't depend on denotation. It depends on connotation. It depends on the implication, association, suggestion, and evocation of meanings and of shades of meaning. For example, the word father denotes a male parent. Nobody would split hairs on this on what the word father denotes. However, it connotes authority, protection, and responsibility. Yet here people would say, no, that's not the connotation of the word father. Yeah, I mean, this connotation is now questionable by the feminist. Yeah. Literary language is expressive also. It communicates tone, it communicates attitude, it communicates feeling. In everyday language is often connotative. Its chief purpose is practical. Everyday language wants to get things done. Literary language organizes linguistic resources into a special arrangement, a complex unity to engender an aesthetic experience, to create an aesthetic world of its own. Unlike scientific and everyday language, the form of literary language, that is, the word choice and the arrangement that create the aesthetic experience, is inseparable from its content, is inseparable from its meaning. How a literary text is made is inseparable from what it means, from its content. That is to say, the form and meaning of a literary text develop together like a complex living organism whose parts cannot be separated from the whole. And by the way, this notion is I took this notion, I borrowed this notion from the New Critics. How did the New Critics judge the quality of a literary work? They judge such quality on the basis of the work's organic unity. That is to say, organic unity has to do with the working together of all parts to make an inseparable whole. The New Critics argued that if a text has an organic unity, then all of its formal elements work together to establish its theme, to establish its meaning. These elements, formal elements, contribute to the theme, contribute to the meaning of the work as a whole. So, through its organic unity, the text provides both the complexity that a literary work must have. It has to be complex. The text provides both the complexity that a literary work must have if it is to adequately represent the complexity of human life. Human life is complex. So the literary work should also be complex because it should be a mirror up to this life, to this human life. It should represent human life. The text, as I said, provides both the complexity that a literary work must have, and the order that human beings by nature seek. For the new critics, if a critic wants to understand the text, he or she has to account for these principles of complexity and order that represent, that embody the text's organic unity. The text's organic unity can be explained through the elucidation of both complexity and order. The text has an order, and it is characterized by this complexity principle. So it's both complexity and order that contributes to the organic unity, add to the organic unity of the text. Complexity is created by the multiple and often conflicting meanings woven together through the text. These meanings are a product of 4 kinds of linguistic devices. You know them. These linguistic devices include paradox, irony, ambiguity, and tension. So when we talk about complexity, we talk about these linguistic devices. Let me begin with paradox. The term paradox means, contrary to expectations, contrary to existing belief, to perceived notion, opinion, whatever. It has to do. It has this contrary, meaning in it. It implies anything that is contrary, contrary to expectations. Yes. It's a statement that seems self-contradictory but represents the actual way things are. For example, let me cite some examples from literary works. I believe you have read Animal Farm by George Orwell. And let me cite an example from George Orwell's Animal Farm. In this novel, one part of the cardinal rule is this statement, quote, "All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others," end of quote. This statement seems not to make any sense. It doesn't seem to have, any sense. It looks nonsensical. However, on closer examination, if you read it closely, if you examine it closely, it becomes clear. You understand that Orwell points out a political truth. This nonsensical statement, reveals a political truth, which is this. The government in the novel claims that everybody is equal, but it has never treated everybody equally. Wow. It is the concept of equality stated in this paradox that is opposite to the common belief of equality. Let me take you to William Shakespeare's Hamlet, and I hope you have read it. In William Shakespeare's Hamlet is a tragedy. The protagonist Hamlet says, "I must be cruel to be kind. I must be cruel to be kind, to be gentle, to be nice." This announcement does not seem to make any sense, does it? How can an individual treat others kindly even when he is cruel? Well, it doesn't make any sense. However, Hamlet is talking about his mother and how he intends to kill Claudius to avenge his father's death. Claudius killed the king, Hamlet's father, Now Hamlet wants to avenge his father's death because Claudius is now married to his mother. He killed his father and married his mother. Hamlet wants to avenge his father's death. This act of Hamlet, or by Hamlet, will be a tragedy for his mother, no doubt, because she is married to Claudius. Hamlet does not want his mother to be the beloved of his father's murderer any longer. He doesn't want to see her, sleep, share the same bed with the killer of his father. And so he thinks that the murder will be good for his mother. Let me move on to irony. Irony is a figure of speech in which words are used in such a way that their intended meaning is different from the actual meaning of the words. Yes, it may also be a situation that ends up in quite a different way than what is generally anticipated. In simple words, it's a difference between appearance and reality. And irony, is of many types, of the three types, to be exact. These types, are verbal, situational, dramatic. Verbal irony involves what one does not mean. For example, when in response to a foolish idea we say, "What a great idea." This is verbal irony. We know that's not a great idea, but we say, "What a great idea." Situational irony occurs when, for example, a man is laughing at the misfortune of another man, even when the same misfortune is happening to him, yet he is not aware of it. Dramatic irony is frequently employed by writers in their works. In situational irony, both the characters and the audience are fully unaware of the implications of the real situation. In dramatic irony, the characters are oblivious, are mindless of the situation, but the audience is not. For example, in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, we know well before the characters they are going to die. As readers, we know that Romeo is going to die, Juliet is going to die. In real life circumstances, irony may be comical, may be bitter, may be unbearable, or unbearably offensive. Here are some examples. We come across the following lines in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 5. Quote, Juliet is speaking here. "Go ask his name, if he be married. My grave is like to be my wedding bed." Go ask his name, if he be married. My grave is like to be my wedding bed. She's asking her servant to go and see if Romeo is married, and if he is married, her grave is going to be her wedding bed. This is a verbal irony. Juliet commands her nurse to find out who Romeo was and says if he were married, then her wedding bed would be her grave. It's a verbal irony because the audience knows that she is going to die on her wedding bed. There are many examples of verbal irony in which the speaker means the opposite of what he says. In Othello by Shakespeare, we come across this type of irony. Othello says, on a number of occasions, speaks of a number of occasions to Iago the villain. He says, "Oh, thou art wise, you are wise. This is certain, honest Iago." We know that Iago is not honest. I know, Iago, thy honesty and love doth means this matter. So he says, "I know, Iago." And he doesn't know Iago, the real face of Iago, thy honesty. So as readers or spectators watching the play, we know that Iago is not somebody who is honest to be trusted. So this is verbal irony. Irony examples are not only found in stage plays, but in poems too, in novels, in literary writings. In this poem, for example, the poem is entitled "The Rime of the Ancient Marina" by Coleridge. It says, "Water, water everywhere, and all the boats did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink." In these lines, the ship, blown by the south wind, is stranded in the uncharted sea. And so ironically, there is water everywhere because it's the sea. The speaker is into the sea, but there is not a single drop of drinkable water. Let me go back. Yeah, the new critics valued irony to indicate a text inclusion of varying perspectives of the same characters or events. Such a variety of possible viewpoints is considered a form of irony because the credibility of each viewpoint undermines to some extent the credibility of the others. The result is a complexity of meaning that mirrors the complexity of human experience and augments the text believability. Now let me move on to ambiguity. Ambiguity occurs when a word, when an image, when an event generates two or more different meanings. For example, ponder about this statement. A good life depends on a liver. A good life depends on a liver. The word liver may be an organ, may refer to an organ, or simply a living person. So the statement is ambiguous. Ponder about this, another statement. Think about it. Foreigners are hunting dogs. Foreigners are hunting dogs. It's unclear whether dogs were being hunted or foreigners are being spoken of as dogs. Again, this is an ambiguous statement sentence. Here is another sentence. Each of us saw her duck. Duck. D-U-C-K. Duck. It's not clear whether the word duck refers to an action of ducking, or a duck that is a bird. This is also an ambiguous statement sentence. In Toni Morrison's Beloved, the image of the tree produced by the scar tissue on Seether's back implies, among other things, suffering. The scar tissue on the back of this character, on Seether's back, could be interpreted as suffering. The tree resulted from a brutal whipping, which is emblematic of all the hardships, experienced under slavery. The scar tissue on Seether's back could also imply endurance, because trees can live, hundreds of years, and the scar tissue itself testifies to Seether's remarkable ability to survive the most traumatic experiences. The scar tissue on Seether's back could also imply, renewal, like the trees that lose their leaves in the fall and are reborn every spring. Seether is offered at the end's close the chance to make a new life. It's very ambiguous. It could imply a number of things. In scientific or everyday language, ambiguity is usually considered a flaw. Yes. If you're writing, a paper, a scientific paper, a paper which you will, contribute to a journal, you will publish in a journal, in a scientific journal, the language in the paper should be clear, shouldn't be ambiguous. If it is ambiguous, then that is a flaw. Ambiguity is usually considered a flaw because it's equated with a lack of clarity and precision in scientific papers. And also in everyday language, you have to be very clear to be understood. Yet in literary language, ambiguity is considered a source of richness, a source of depth, complexity that adds to the text value and significance. I hope this is clear. Now let me move on to tension, to the third linguistic device, tension. The complexity of a literary text. Remember, I'm still talking about this principle of complexity. The complexity of literary text is created by its tension, which broadly defined, means the linking together of opposites. It has to do with the linking together of opposites. In common usage, tension refers to a sense of heightened involvement, to uncertainty, and interest an audience experiences, as the climax of the action approaches. For new criticism, the word tension refers more specifically to the equality of balanced opposites that can provide form and unity to a literary work of diverse components. This sort of tension exists between the literal and metaphorical meanings of a work, between what is written and what the text implies, between the serious and the ironic, between contradictions in the text that the reader must resolve without authorial discussion, without going back to the intentions of the author. It should be noted that the complexity of a text, to which all of these linguistic devices contribute, must be complemented by a sense of order if a literary work is to achieve greatness. Therefore, all of the multiple and conflicting meanings produced by the text, paradoxes, ironies, ambiguities, and tensions must be resolved or harmonized by their shared contribution to the theme. The text theme or complete meaning is not the same thing as its topic. The theme is what the text, does with its topic. For example, adultery is a topic of both Kate Chopin's The Storm and Alberto Moravia's The Chase, but the meaning of adultery, that is to say, its moral and psychological implications, the meaning of adultery is quite different in each story. In Chopin's story, a single, spontaneous act of adultery seems to improve the emotional health and marriages of the two participants. The theme of The Storm is that individual circumstances, not abstract rules, determine what is right, determine what is wrong, determine what is healthy, determines what is unhealthy. In the other story, the young wife's extramarital affair seems to both result from and contribute to the emotional distance between her husband and herself. It's a theme, one can argue, is that adultery is an emotional distance, and as such, it signals the end of emotional intimacy in a marriage. In this sense, the theme is an interpretation of human experience. And the text is a great text. The theme serves as a commentary on human values, human nature, or the human condition. To be able to study both the formal elements and the theme, you have to closely read the text. I mean, you have to closely read the text, or the reader has to closely read the text, you as a reader. Closer reading, this scrupulous examination of the complex relationship between a text's formal elements and its theme is how the text organic unity could be established. In other words, you have to examine the linguistic devices of paradox, of irony, ambiguity, and tension. And you have also to define the text figurative language. The images, the symbols, the metaphors, and similes. Figurative language, is language that has more than one or other than a strictly literal meaning. Figurative language uses figures of speech to be more effective, persuasive, and impactful. Figures of speech, such as metaphors, similes, and allusions, go beyond the literal meanings of the words to give readers new insights. The term figurative language covers a wide range of literary devices and techniques, a few of which include simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, allusion, idiom, imagery, symbolism, assonance, consonance, metonymy, irony, sarcasm, pun, anaphora, etc. A simile makes a comparison showing similarities between two different things. A simile draws resemblance with the help of the words like or as. Therefore, it is a direct comparison. For example, our soldiers are as brave as lions. This is a direct comparison. It's a simile. A metaphor makes an implicit, implied, or hidden comparison between two things that are unrelated, but which share common or some common characteristics. In other words, a resemblance of two contradictory or different objects is made based on a single or some common characteristics. For example, her voice is a music to his ears. This implies that her voice makes him feel happy. Another example, the skies of his future began to darken. Darkness is a threat. Therefore, this implies that the coming times, maybe the days to come, the near days to come, are going to be hard for him. Literature is fiction. It's imagination. It has to do with fictive works, with imaginative works. In these works, yes, the novelist, the artist, creates a fictive cosmos, inhabited by fictive characters. These characters have no past, no future. And there should be a setting. By setting, we refer to time and place, and the setting is not real. Yeah, literature is fictional, inventional, imaginational. Thus, a literary work of art is not a simple object, but rather a highly complex organization of a stratified character with multiple meanings and relationships. So I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me via Facebook or my email address. In the next lecture, I'm going to talk to you about the 2 short stories by George Orwell. So stay safe, and if you have any questions, as I said, contact me. I will respond to them with pleasure. Stay safe, and please use your time wisely and read books. Thank you very much. Stay safe.